Second part is to show you this very simple way of inputting the data into the data management system that really is a piece of cake, so that nobody's intimidated about this anymore. And my hope and desire is that within the next couple of years we really start building a much, much bigger evidence base, so that really can establish things. The third thing is, you may have noticed I've changed the name of the Practice Research Network, originally titled the Human Givens Institute Practice Research Network. It's now called the Pragmatic Research Network, because what I'm hoping to do, I believe that we've taken the lead in this. As an independent body, we're now demonstrating internationally that this can be done, that you can stand up and be counted, that you can do these things and measure your outcomes. And it's not that complicated. And I think we need to show others how to do this as well. Now think of the beauty of that. If you have other practitioners from other persuasions also measuring their data, we can all learn from each other. We can see when clients who are worked with in a certain way seem to make improvements. We can start investigating that and finding out. And we can engage in dialogue in a very sort of inclusive way, so there's no longer this idea of them and us, that the people of all sorts of persuasions, of all sorts of orientations, can look upon this as a way of exploring what they're doing in treatment with their clients, and we can all learn from each other. And I think, you know, what I've come to learn in seeing a lot of therapists now of all sorts of different orientations, that therapists get good results with clients in many ways in spite of the way they were trained, not just because of the way they were trained. And I think it gives all of those people that opportunity to demonstrate that. The final thing I want to say is, I believe the next great frontier is what I call case study research. Why? If you can imagine having data on 1,000 clients, and you can demonstrate that 70% of that 1,000 clients appeared to have shown reasonable improvement in treatment, and let's say 50% of the clients actually ended up with scores below the cutoff on the measures, so they're deemed to be, in IAPT terminology, moving to recovery, well, that's great. But the question is, what happened to those clients? What actually went on in the treatment? So if you were working, for example, with a client from PTSD resolution and somebody who was traumatized in war or in the services in the military 30 years ago, if you had rich data about the qualitative experience of the treatment from the client's perspective, from the therapist's perspective, and possibly from the supervisor's perspective, and it's robustly written up, what that means is that over time, as you gather lots and lots of these case studies, when somebody says, well, how do we know what you're doing in treatment? You say, well, all you got to do is read the case study and you can find the narrative. And in fact, this brings me on to the work of a wonderful chap called, where's my book? Fishman? Here he is. Dan Fishman. So Dan Fishman wrote this book, fabulous book, in 1999 called The Case for Pragmatic Psychology. And in this book he's arguing, he's making the point that, look, we have a dichotomy in our field. We have the positivists who think everything is an objective reality out there that's measurable and quantifiable on the one side, and over on the other side we have the postmodernists who say, not at all, you know, it's all about process and you can't really measure anything, and the whole thing about measurement is all a waste of time. But he says, you know, the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle. And he says, look, if you do robust case study. Now, this is quite different to the sort of anecdotal reports, albeit really interesting, and there's been some great stuff published in anecdotal reports like the book An Idea in Practice. The difficulty with that, when you're looking at it from a research perspective, is that there isn't enough sort of objective devil's advocate style of inquiry. In a way, the idea of pragmatic case study research is that where you're curious about, you're involved with a team looking at the data, so it's rather than researching your own cases, you have somebody else researching it. So the other person is sort of saying, well, maybe, you know, could there be any other explanation other than the treatment for why this client got better, right? Very interesting process. A huge, huge opportunity for learning for us all, I think. And can you imagine it? Like, to me, it's just like, it would just be wonderful to understand what therapists are actually doing. doing. I think this goes right back into the training then, where it's informing the training, because in the training you can pick up and think, well, what parts of what we thought we were teaching people to do did they actually do? What other things are they doing that we didn't teach them at all that are actually helping? Do you see? So I think that is the new frontier. So I think, you know, the take-home message is measure your outcomes, and following on from that, if you find the opportunity to think about getting involved in case study research, let me know, because I'm looking for an increasing number of volunteers over the next few years to get involved in this and carry on with that work. So that's the end of the synopsis. Is that okay? Okay, fantastic. So does anyone want to ask me any questions at this point, in case there's anything I haven't been clear on?
If we have a whole lot of core data, but which has not been entered, can you still make use of that?
Yep, absolutely, yeah. So any data that you've got historically in paper format, because I've made this so much easier, it will be much easier to enter. Is it in Core 34 at first appointment, or Core 10 at first appointment?
34.
34, okay. So I've got a new Core 34 measure where basically, here's another thing. All the Core 34 data, I couldn't use the 34 answers to compare with a Core 10 later on, because we have an awful lot of data in Core 10. A lot of practitioners got jacked off with using a Core 34 at the end, so they used Core 10 and used it as their final measure. So what I've had to do is go back in and suck out the 10 answers, right? So actually it's even easier then. So all you need to do is to identify which of the 10 questions. So when you go back to a paper Core 34, you don't have to add up all the 34, you just add up the 10, get a total score and put that in, which you'll see now shortly. So obviously it's a little bit of a faff, but you could probably make, I don't know, a bit of something to lie over the answers to block out the ones that are irrelevant, you know, and just get the total score from that. And then, so supposing you have a client where you have Core 34, Core 10, Core 10, Core 10, Core 10, you only need the 10 from the first one and the last one. You don't need to worry about all the ones in the middle anymore. Do you see? So it's going to get a lot easier. All right?